right, and then before I hand over to our Executive Director of the Fowler Center for Sustainable Value, Ante Glavis, I have a quick group of people that I would like to recognize. Now, when we started working on this forum, we said that the theme of the forum is managed by designing in an era of massive innovation, and we wanted to bring some design elements into the forum. And we wanted to look at how designers think and work and bring some of that and populate this at the forum as well. And then the idea came up and said, well, you know, you should really speak to Doug Page at the Cleveland Institute of Art because he's really passionate about sustainability and he might have some good ideas. And had a conversation with Doug and we said, well, you know, there's some students at the Cleveland Institute of Art working on sustainable design and you can actually see some of their work that's up in the gallery over there right now. And working on ideas around designs that benefit society and benefit the environment and take a different look at things. I said, well, yeah, why don't we bring those ideas in? And they said, well, why don't we bring some of the students that are at the Cleveland Institute of Arts and some of the graduates and help them to bring some ideas to the conference. And it has evolved to a point where I cannot live without my design team from the Cleveland Institute of Art. They've been fantastic. They have put together all the communications and graphic design for the forum. They've put together the entire environment design. And so much of what you see here has evolved through the months working with the team from the Cleveland Institute of Art. They've put in many, many hours, many, many fruitful ideas, and I would highly recommend each and every one of them to all of you. And I'm very grateful to you. So if Nick and Diana and Amanda and Abigail and Doug, if you can all just stand up, and guys, just give them a round of applause. They're fabulous. So without further ado, I'm going to hand over to my boss and yours, Ante Glavis, the Executive Director for the Fowler Center. Thank you.
Well, good afternoon, everyone. First of all, it's a pleasure to be here. And as I'll say later, 2.5 years ago on this day, I was in Jean's shoes, managing the forum and all the logistics. So Jean, it's fun to see you running around doing all the work right now while we're up here talking and babbling. To introduce this panel, first of all, I want to introduce Rinaldo Brutoco, who will introduce the rest of the panel. So I won't go into details about the panel right now. But I do want to say a few words about Rinaldo, who was introduced to her story last night, and many of you probably weren't there last night. He has, like many of us here, bios which are extremely long, so I just want to touch on a few points, but also tell a personal story about experience of Rinaldo and also about the role of business in this whole forum. Rinaldo, first and foremost, is the founder and president of the World Business Academy. If you're not familiar with that, I highly recommend you go to their site. We have the leading thinkers in the world who are part of the World Business Academy. And just one little story I want to tell you about some of the foresight they have, and to really listen to what Rinaldo has to say is that, remember about 2 years ago, Rinaldo told me the price of oil is going to hit $100 in exactly a year. Okay, yeah, whatever. Exactly, almost to the day, got the projection right. Economic crisis about 6 to 12 months before it happened, perfectly predicted exactly what was going to happen. So their journals and their forecast thinking really speak to what's going on in the world. And that's where I got to know Rinaldo was in Croatia. We were partners in crime many years ago, I think started about 12 years ago. We set up a business school in Croatia, and many Croatians, like a lot of former socialist countries at the time, wanted to emulate the worst from the West. They're trying to copy the pure, hardcore, analytical, industrial models that got us into this mess. Because that's what you know, that's what you see in the films and so forth. And here we were organizing this business school, and we invited Rinaldo to speak to 100 Croatians in a bar, because we only meet in bars. And these were the leaders of the country there. And I was really nervous, because I knew these guys. They were hardcore, cutthroat business people who overacted what they thought capitalism was about. They were really cutthroat, and I thought they're not going to listen to this guy's message. They came out blown away, knowing that business has the power to change the world, and foremost, we have the power to change ourselves. Just because we are not educated to see what business can bring. I think we are a lot more progressive now in Croatia thanks to that school, but a lot has to do with the World Business Academy thinking. And that's why we also brought in this panel today, is because we feel that business, as progressive as it is today, can do a lot more. And it's often we don't see what's possible because we've been conditioned to think a certain way about business. And therefore, we want to hear from three esteemed panelists, to hear from Procter & Gamble, a very large company, one of the largest in the world, and see what they're doing innovatively, to hear from one of the leading health systems in the world, the Cleveland Clinic, which is a complex system, to see the amazing work they are doing, and of course from Ray Anderson and Interface and the innovative work they've done. So the few last remarks I want to say to Rinaldo, and a pitch for his book, which I always have to put in, is Freedom from Mideast Oil, so definitely get a copy of that and talk about fossil fuel. And you can read the rest of Rinaldo's bio on here, so I don't keep on going through it, but he's done a lot of amazing things, spent 37 years in business. So I think this panel is really at the core of what we want to do at this conference. So with all of today, taking the design thinking, taking what the business sector has to say, then tomorrow we want to get into the second half of the conference where we actually roll up our sleeves and start designing solutions. So you as conference delegates aren't here just to hear speeches for the sake of it. You'll actually be co-creating real solutions for the field. And so, further ado, Rinaldo, I'll let you kick off the panel and take it from here.
Thanks, Andre. Thank you. So, my remarks are going to be very brief because the real substance is these gentlemen to my left. The context setter for this panel is not unlike what many of us have discovered in business over the years, which is continuing to do the same thing over and over again and expecting a different result is, in fact, the definition of insanity. When you see that played out in a large scale, the contrast is quite brilliant. I'll give you an example. Last night you were sitting in a gorgeous glass-lined arcade. I believe that was the first indoor commercial shopping or retail experience in America. It was conceived in the late 1800s, built in 1890. That is a monument that has last been refurbished, and as you noticed last night, was an extraordinary theater for the presentations that we did and for opening this conference. That, to me, was a clever concept, a brilliant concept, really, beyond clever. It was an idea for how you could take and reconceptualize that retail didn't have to be done on the side of a street, basically dirt streets in those days, but in fact could be contained in some sort of an envelope within which people could create community instead of being strung along in a linear fashion. That was a design. That design came from a business concept, and of course, it was John Rockefeller who paid for it, so it was business that funded it. Contrast that, if you will, by what happened this week, where if you exclude WorldCom, and I don't think of them as an industrial corporation, they're a technology corporation, the largest industrial bankruptcy in the history of the world occurred this week with General Motors. Many people have said for many, many years that the reason that General Motors had problems wasn't because they had one big problem or one little blip on the radar, but a succession of bad miscues and missteps, which most external analysts, myself included, would blame on inbred management in Detroit. And it's interesting to note that the only automobile company of the three that isn't bankrupt is Ford, and they're the only one that brought a manager from outside of Detroit to run it. Alan Mulcahy came from Boeing. So if you look at the concept of what do we design, and I think this is a good transition, you think sometimes of artists and you think sometimes merely of creativity, or Craig was saying, pre-packaging. But it's actually more fundamental than that. You see, consciousness is where all business ideas originate from. Take Henry Ford himself. Before there could be a Model T, someone had to envision what it could be and how it could work and how America could respond to it. So the idea always precedes the execution. What I've enjoyed about my 37 years in business is that in working all those years with the CEOs in a variety of ways as partners in ventures or companies I've worked with or ones that have come to work for me, I've always enjoyed the fact that CEOs really understand that concepts really, really are the key element, and that our job in business is to translate those concepts onto the material plane of reality. So we take the etheric, the non-substantial, and we translate it to the material plane of reality. In that sense, having a panel like this of CEOs to talk with us and senior executives, to talk with us and discuss how we can see design not merely as a pretty picture, but as a conceptual framework from which we can grow and from which those massive changes that Bruce talked about can occur. So with that in mind, I was interested in launching today with a description of our first speaker, who I think you're going to enjoy. Some of you have probably seen him at the theater because Ray's been doing this for a while. Ray Anderson, to my left, is the founder and chairman of Interface Incorporated. He relinquished being CEO about 7 years ago. The story is now legendary of how the spear-in-the-chest epiphany happened to Ray when he first read Paul Hawkins' The Ecology of Commerce, seeking inspiration for a speech to an Interface task force on the company's environmental mission. 14 years and a sea of change later, Interface Inc. is nearly 50% to its target of Mission Zero, or as Ray likes to call it, climbing Mount Sustainability. We asked Ray to come today because we think Interface is an excellent example of how the application of design thinking can result not only in more sustainable products, but also a more sustainable business model, which produces environmental, social, and of course, economic results. These three working together provided a core strategy and are true value drivers, which Ray has been the example of on walking through the world telling his story. Interface is this classic example of design thinking for sustainability. And with and Ray, by the way, received an award for sustainability from the Academy in 2004 in Santa Barbara, has been a member of the Academy for several years now, and together with another fellow of the Academy, Janine Benyus, who you're going to be hearing from tomorrow, created from her biomimicry, designed a new type of carpet, a more sustainable product that takes its inspiration from nature. So it's a joy to introduce Ray, not only because of who he is and what he's done, but because of the delightful human being he is and how I thoroughly enjoy walking the sustainability path with him through the world. Ray.
Thank you, Rinaldo, and thank you for the good work you do every day. It's great to be back, and to have David Cooperrider out here. I think an awful lot of David. My assignment today is to lead off this panel, and hopefully to set the stage for Dr. Cosgrove and Mr. Wynett, whether they agree or disagree or are totally agnostic on anything I say. It is an honor to be here with these three distinguished gentlemen. Since I don't know where you are with respect to sustainability, probably in a lot of different places, one objective that I have here is to get us all to a shared framework, because I believe that that is critical for the progress in this troubled world that we all want to heal. I'll be drawing on some learnings that have come our way at Interface, and by the way, we make carpet tiles primarily for commercial and institutional interiors, also for the home under the brand name Floor, misspelled F-L-O-R. We have been climbing this Mount Sustainability these last 4 years, and the learnings that I want to bring to this, I think apply at human scale, that's you and me, at company scale, your organization and mine, societal scale, city, national, and even the macro scale, the world. So let me start at the macro level. I will dip into the micro later. I begin with Paul and Ann Ehrlich's well-known environmental impact equation, I equal P times A times T. Environmental impact, a bad thing, is the product of people, affluence, and technology. In other words, it's people, what they consume, and how it's made. This describes the industrial system that is degrading the biosphere as we speak through its environmental impacts. But what confines T to the numerator, where the more technology we throw at the problem, the worse the problem becomes? I suggest that these are technologies of the, how do I make this advance, Rinaldo? There we are. Technologies of the first industrial revolution. that share some characteristics. They're extractive, they take from the earth, they are linear, take, make, waste technologies, driven by fossil fuels for energy, abusive, wasteful, and focused on labor productivity, more everything per man hour. But what if we could move technology to the denominator, where more technology would reduce impacts, I equal P times A divided by T. And I give Bill McDonough credit for this insight, which he shared with me many years ago. Technologies are now renewable, not extractive, cyclical, not linear, no more take, make, waste. They are solar and hydrogen driven, no more fossil fuel. They're benign rather than abusive, emulating nature where there is no waste. In nature, one organism's waste is another's food, and focused on resource productivity, the productivity of all resources, not just labor. Parenthetically, that formula has driven all R&D, process development, and product development at Interface for the last 14 years. Now, please keep that formula in mind as I try to create the context for the redesign of the industrial system. What keeps T in the numerator? And if we must move it to the denominator, what is the key to this redesign of the entire industrial system? Well, my premise is that we individually and collectively, that's humankind, are an integral part of two interrelated global systems. Let us call one the technosphere. The other key component of the technosphere, besides ourselves, is the industrial system. The technosphere, we in the industrial system, coexists with the second global system, the biosphere. The biosphere consists of all the natural systems, the living systems, the life support systems of Earth, the forests, the rivers, the oceans, the wetlands, the atmosphere, the aquifers, the hydrologic cycle, pollination, seed dispersal, et cetera, and all of life on Earth, including us. So we have the technosphere, and we have the biosphere, and we have the coexistence of these two within a thin spherical shell that is 8,000 miles in diameter, the diameter of the Earth, and about 10 miles thick, extending from sea level about 5 miles into the depths of the ocean and about 5 miles upward into the troposphere. Notice that we humans are the common element in both. And relatively speaking, the thin shell is the thickness of saran wrap on a basketball-sized Earth. In this context, then, a good definition of sustainability might be the continued, healthy, balanced coexistence into the indefinite future of the technosphere and the biosphere within the thin shell. Another name for the biosphere is nature. Yet it's manifestly clear today that this coexistence is so unbalanced and so threatened that it is not healthy. On a global scale, every living system is in decline. Biodiversity plummets. An extinction unprecedented in 65 million years is underway. The human footprint increases. The planet warms. The weather goes nuts. The climate is disrupted. The technosphere continues to expand at nature's expense as the economy worships at the shrine of growth. The question arises, how can this go on and on and on and on into the indefinite future? And the answer is, clearly it cannot. Unless we somehow miraculously find the Earth to be infinite in its ability to supply the stuff that is demanded by the technosphere and to absorb the poison that is produced by the technosphere. This imbalance, this disequilibrium is a serious, serious problem that we are creating for our grandchildren and their grandchildren. So how do we begin to reverse the trends, eliminate this problem, and bring these two systems, technosphere and nature, into harmonious balance in a way that will last 1,000 human generations, 10,000 human generations, that is to say, indefinitely? This is the fundamental problem that we have addressed at Interface over the last 14 years at the level of the firm. And we've had some good help in our quest. For example, Dana Meadows. Dana was one of the smartest people I've known, a biophysicist, an expert systems analyst, an author, a syndicated columnist, a college professor at Dartmouth, and a farmer. She died tragically early. Dana, in her prime, published an elegant paper entitled Places to Intervene in a System in Increasing Order of Effectiveness. And sort of David Letterman fashion, 9876, she lists the places to intervene in increasing order of effectiveness, beginning with number 9 and working down to number 1, the most effective place to intervene. Number 9 on the list, the least effective place that makes the list, is to adjust the numbers, the resources going into the system, more of this and that, money, people, less of subsidies and taxes. Sound familiar? Yet Dana says least effective of all. Working down or up the list toward more effective, we find such things as adjusting the negative feedback loops of the system, and still more effective, driving the positive feedback loops of the system, and still more effective, changing the goals of the system. But number 9 on the list, the most effective place to intervene, according to this brilliant woman, is to challenge the mindset behind the system, the paradigm, the perception of reality, the mental model of how things are that underlies the system in the first place. Dana says this is the most effective place to intervene, but she acknowledges that it's also the most difficult. Now, we have systems all around us. Within this technosphere, we have our transportation system, our communication systems, our production systems, our computer systems, our production planning systems, our management systems, our systems of government, our accounting systems, our legal system, our educational system, our healthcare system, our systems for managing our households, our regulatory system, our banking system, and more and more. Altogether, these comprise the industrial system that has arisen out of the first industrial revolution, represented by I = P times A times T. So what is the paradigm behind the modern industrial system, this system that so dominates our lives? I suggest it is or should I ask, is it an accurate view of reality, or is it a flawed view of reality? And I suggest that it is a seriously flawed view of reality, and we need a new paradigm. The truth of a new paradigm doesn't just spring into existence. It will have been there all along. It will just have been obscured by the old flawed view of reality. The earth was always round, even when everyone knew it was flat. It always circled the sun, even when everyone knew it was the center of the universe. The divine rights of kings were considered the natural order, even as revolution was fomenting in the New World's colonies and in France. If you look carefully at how the industrial system, of which we're all a part, operates, you know that it originated in another day and age, and it still views or acts as if it views reality just as it did then, way back 297 years ago, when Thomas Newcomen invented the steam-driven pump in 1712 to pump water out of the English coal mines so the miners could mine more coal. That was the dawn of the first industrial revolution. Here is the 18th century view of reality that still very significantly pervades our thinking. The earth is so large, it's an inexhaustible source of materials, natural resources will never run out. There will always be substitutes available. The market will find them. Economics 101, Chapter 1. The earth is so large, it's a limitless sink, able to assimilate our waste, no matter how poisonous, no matter how much. The solution to pollution is dilution, quip the environmental protection people. Relevant time frames for considering the consequences of our decisions are, well, the maximum, the life of a human being. Who thinks beyond that? More likely, the working life of a human being, sometimes, especially in business, just the next quarter, in politics, just the next election. Earth was made for humans to conquer and rule. Homo sapiens, self-named wise man, doesn't really need those other species except for food, fiber, fuel, and maybe shade on a hot summer day. Technology is omnipotent, especially when coupled with human intelligence, specifically left brain intelligence, practical, objective, realistic, numbers-driven, results-oriented, unemotional. These will suffice, thank you. And how about this one? Adam Smith's invisible hand of the market is an honest broker. Or this one, business exists to make a profit. Or this, the way to abundance for all is through increasing labor productivity. It was natural enough to think this way when people were scarce and nature was bountiful in the 18th century. Or finally, this, also from Economics 101, the basic economic problem drives all of economic progress. It is the gap between what we have and what we want, a gap the economists say we can never close. I work at Interface to create a sustainable company as an example for an industrial system that is sustainable into the indefinite future has convinced me that every element of that paradigm is wrong, dead wrong, and that survival of our species depends on a new industrial system developing and quickly based on a new paradigm, a new and more accurate view of reality, one that acknowledges the Earth is finite. You can see it from space. That is all there is. It is finite, both as a source, what it can provide, and as a sink, what it can assimilate and endure. On a finite Earth, the solution to pollution is prevention. There will come an end to the substitutes that are possible. You cannot substitute water for food, or air for water, or food for warmth, or energy for air, or air for food. Some things are complementary, and not even the market can change that. Economics 101, Chapter 1 needs to be rewritten. Relevant time frames for considering the consequences of our decisions are evolutionary in scale. We must at least think beyond ourselves in our brief, puny time on Earth, so brief, and think of our species and the 30 million other species over evolutionary time, the true long run. Here, just for starters, we could adopt the Native American standard of 7 generations. Humankind was made for Earth, not the other way around. Earth doesn't belong to us, we belong to it. And the diversity of nature is crucially important in keeping the whole web of life, including us, going sustainably over evolutionary time. Technology must fundamentally change if it is to become part of the solution instead of continuing to be a major part of the problem. The technologies we have grown up with and take for granted share those common attributes that put them in the numerator, I equal P times A times T. The new technologies must move to the denominator, cyclical, solar-driven, waste-free, benign, and focused on resource productivity, the productivity of all resources. It is now nature that is scarce and diminishing, and people that are overly abundant. And that in itself calls for totally new thinking. The right side of the brain, the caring, the nurturing, the artistic, subjective, the sensitive and emotional side, the feminine side, if you will, in business, the soft side of business is at least as important as the left side, perhaps a good bit more important, since it represents the human spirit. And the market is opportunistic, if not outright dishonest, in its willingness to externalize any cost that an unwary or uncaring public will allow it to externalize. It must constantly be redressed to keep it honest. Does the price of a pack of cigarettes reflect its cost? Not close. A barrel of oil? Not within $150 a barrel. The revered invisible hand is blind as a bat if it ignores the externalities. How can it be an honest broker, stumbling along in its blindness? How can it be an honest allocator of resources? Business exists to make a profit? I beg to differ. Business makes a profit to exist. It must surely exist for some higher purpose. What CEO really expects to stand before her or his maker someday and discuss shareholder value? In a world of 4 billion very poor people and too little nature, the route to abundance for all must surely be through increasing resource productivity, putting people to work using stuff more efficiently. For clearly the greatest moral, ethical, and practical challenge humanity faces is to lift the poorest among us out of grinding poverty while simultaneously healing the already damaged, badly damaged earth. And what about the basic economic problem? What if we matured into a species to the point that the problem became the gap between what we have and what we need? That would address the impact equation in another way. It would make that capital A that suggests an end in itself into a lowercase a, suggesting a means to an end. And it would the real end, of course, that we all seek is more happiness. I equal P little a divided by T2 times H for happiness. More happiness with less stuff would redefine a new civilization built on a new industrial system. In our own way at Interface, we have chosen to intervene in the system as we operated it for 21 years from inception in 1973 until 1994, when we had our mid-course correction. And from the new mindset, the more accurate view of reality, we devised a plan to climb the 7 faces of Mount Sustainability, clear to the top, that point at the top symbolizing zero footprint. The 7 faces: the face of waste, the face of emissions, the face of energy, the face of material flows, the face of transportation, the face of culture, and the face of commerce, how we go to market. Our goal at Interface is to transform our petro-intensive company, and that is for both materials and energy, into a sustainable, zero environmental impact, zero footprint company by 2020, meaning to bring our company into complete balance and harmony with nature. And when we are successful, we will no longer be taking anything from the earth that the earth cannot naturally and rapidly renew, not another fresh drop of oil for energy or materials, and we will be doing no harm to the biosphere. Where are we in this quest? Net greenhouse gases in absolute terms are down 71% against our baseline 1996, 83% relative to sales intensity. Water usage is down 74%. Energy usage is down 44% relative to sales. Fossil energy is down 60% relative to sales. The most secure barrel of oil there is the one not used through efficiencies. Renewable energy is now 28% of our total, but for electricity alone, 89% is renewable. 8 of 10 factories run on 100% renewable electricity. Waste has been cut in half, creating a cost avoidance of some $405 million cumulatively through the years. Landfill scrap is down 78%. 175 million pounds of products have been diverted from landfills at the end of their first life. And 85 million square yards of climate-neutral carpet have been produced and sold. The entire supply chain from the wellhead in the mine clear to end-of-life reclamation, climate neutral. Altogether, we're a bit over halfway to our zero footprint, the top of Mount Sustainability. We call this Mission Zero, and it has been incredibly good for business. If we, a petro-intensive company, can do it, anybody can. If anybody can, it follows everybody can. But is it really possible? Amory Lovins, my good friend, says, if it exists, it must be possible. Thank you.
So at my beginning remarks, I mentioned that Alan Mulally was brought into Ford to bring in a new kind of thinking into a relatively hidebound management team or group, which we referred to in the old days as Detroit Inc. What Ray represented is a new kind of thinking that happened within the industry itself. in that momentous moment where he had a dramatic change and perceived that what they were doing successfully, so it wasn't for the lack of sales, it was for a new awareness. So that's a different kind of openness of mind and a different way to approach. Our next panelist, I think, represents still another way to see a dramatically different picture than what you would expect. Dr. Toby Cosgrove, who's the largest employer in Cleveland here through the Cleveland Clinic and the second largest in the state of Ohio, is not only an extraordinarily skilled surgeon with 22,000 operations to his credit, having been decorated initially in Vietnam and worked continuously until 2 years ago as a cardiac specialist with, I think, something like 30 patents filed for developing various medical devices, an expertise particularly in heart valves, an unusual career that almost anyone would be happy to have achieved and would have been, I think, willing to have been pigeonholed in with great distinction and honor. And yet, there's a very interesting system that breeds a different change of thinking at the Cleveland Clinic. And that system is a collegiality which has been going on so long that our own dear David Cooperrider was inspired to do his dissertation as a graduate student on the collegial decision-making capacity of Cleveland Clinic and how they elevate doctors, one of their own, to the position of CEO. What's fascinating is that when you take someone from a medical background and you ask them to breathe new information into their own way of looking at the world, so instead of looking at the micro application of a single valve and a single heart with full intensity, you're looking at the macro application of $4.6 billion of plant in a healthcare system that includes the Cleveland Clinic, 9 community hospitals, 14 family health and ambulatory surgery centers, Cleveland Clinic, Florida, Cleveland Clinic, Toronto, and the developing medicine in Charlottesville, and completing the clinical training. All these things have to go hand in hand like a series of pie plates being juggled. And it requires a very different kind of thinking. So I had the good fortune when I met Dr. Cosgrove, Toby, earlier today, and I asked him who was his mentor, and he said, unfortunately, no one. Which means that he had to do it with a new kind of thinking that came from within, and something for which, as a great and noted heart surgeon, he wasn't trained, but clearly he was prepared. So it gives me great joy to introduce Dr. Cosgrove. Toby.
Well, Rinaldo, thank you very much. I'm delighted to be here, and I think it's... Is this working? Guess not. Nope. Okay. I'm delighted to be here and delighted to have an opportunity to talk to you today. And I'd like to tell you a little bit about the Cleveland Clinic and how the Cleveland Clinic was designed for sustainability over a long period of time. Are we on? There we go. And so let me just begin by telling you a little bit about the Cleveland Clinic, which was founded in 1921 by these 4 individuals with a tripartite mission of caring for the sick, investigating their problems, and educating those who served. One of the very interesting quotes by George Cryle, one of the original founders of the Cleveland Clinic, is our institution is designed to meet what we believe to be a public need in a more flexible organization. This organization has the advantage of plasticity. And that plasticity was born around working as a unit. And the structure of the Cleveland Clinic is it's a not-for-profit organization. It's the largest group practice in the United States. Has physician leadership. We are all salaried with no financial incentives, and we have annual professional reviews and 1-year contracts. This is a rather unique organization. It originated with this building on Euclid Avenue in 1921, which still stands, but the organization has grown substantially over that time to now include a new heart center and 3 hotels, a research institution, multiple parking garages, and it has gone out across the United States and around the world, from Las Vegas to the desert of Abu Dhabi on the other end, from Canada to Florida, and with 27 facilities in Northeast Ohio. This organization was built around the concept of innovation, which was born into its DNA. George Kreil started initially with things like the air mattress. Wilhelm Koff developed dialysis, and this is a Maytag washer, which was used with casings from sausages for the original dialysis machine. Followed by that was Mason Sohn's groundbreaking coronary angiography 50 years ago this year. You can see Mason Sohn's was underneath the table at that time when he did his first angiogram. This was accompanied 10 years later by the first coronary bypass operation done by René Favaloro, and this group then went on to have a major impact on the number one cause of death in the world, coronary artery disease. Shortly thereafter, the first cadaveric kidney transplant was done by the transplant team at the Cleveland Clinic, and it established the Cleveland Clinic around these four cornerstones: quality, innovation, teamwork, and service. And I'd like to talk to you today about the first two of those, quality and innovation. Winston Churchill said that the empires of the future are the empires of the mind. And it was going to be people's ability to think in new and different ways that was going to be the important currency going forward, no longer land or minerals. So the structure of the institution has followed a little bit of that thinking. This traditional structure of any academic medical center is based around the professional organization, departments of surgery and departments of medicine. I was a member of the Department of Surgery for years with neurosurgeons, colorectal surgeons, gynecologists, with nothing in common with any of them except we all wore gloves and masks. We have rethought this to begin to think about how we could bring together an organization not built around the professionals in the hospital, but rather around patients in the hospital. So we began to think about how we could bring together the individuals that would center on an organ system or a disease system around the patient. For example, in the Neurological Institute, there's neurosurgeons, psychiatrists, and neurologists. So if you have a headache, regardless of who needs to treat it, you're in the right pew. And all of the technologies are brought to bear to help you in that particular situation. So the basic building blocks for this institute model are built around the organ systems, the disease systems. They're commonly located so that the cardiologists and the cardiac surgeons see each other at the coffee pot, and similarly they have a common leadership. This is the location now of the Heart and Vascular Institute. It contains cardiologists, cardiac surgery, thoracic surgery, vascular surgery, and vascular medicine. And the intensive care units, the operating rooms, the offices, the patient beds, and all the diagnostic capabilities for those specialties. So this is beginning to bring together people who think about the same problems in a patient. So we have reorganized care, no longer centered around a profession, but rather centered around a patient's problem. This is the first organization in the country that has been, in fact, as far as I know in the world, that has been organized this way. We also began to think about what is quality in healthcare. And we think quality in healthcare is around three specific things. First of all, it's a medical experience. Secondly, it is a physical experience. And thirdly, it's an emotional experience. We've begun to look at the clinical experience, and we think that we need to measure it and be transparent about that. And we therefore have every year asked our various institutes to put out booklets that say, this is the measurement, these are the problems, this is the successes, and to trend it over time. This is available both in written form and on the web. We think that transparency and measuring are two ingredients that are important for beginning to have quality in a clinical arena. Secondly, we think that the electronic medical record is important. Our facilities are these hospitals in Northeast Ohio. Around those are the family health centers, and all of these are connected by the electronic medical record. So you can go from the Chagrin Falls Family Health Center to Hillcrest Hospital to the main campus and back again without carrying any paper. The electronic medical record goes with you. This helps have continuity of care and drives quality. Similarly, we've begun to document the notes in the electronic medical record, and we're now, starting last April, we're now approaching 80% of the notes are entered that way in hospitalized patients. Similarly, we're over 90% currently of orders that are ordered from the pharmacy via the electronic medical record, eliminating the problem for doctors' handwriting being misinterpreted, which I understand sometimes can happen. Similarly, we've turned our attention to the physical and the emotional aspects. And 2 years ago, I hired a Dr. Bridget Duffy as the first Chief Experience Officer for any hospital in the country. Her sole responsibility is to look after the experience of patients in the hospital, be it their physical or their emotional input that goes into their patient's experience. We've looked at the patient's room. It's now single-bedded rooms with floor-to-ceiling glass, a pull-out couch where families can either sit or spend the night in a pull-out bed. We've looked at putting an opportunity for patients to get outside of their room with a rooftop pavilion where they can look out over the city and get a bite of fresh air to relieve the atmosphere of the hospital. We've looked at the landscaping, putting calming water features in front of the hospital to try and relieve anxiety. We've looked at art in the hospital and as a stimulus to begin to stimulate the senses of patients in the hospital. We brought the New York Philharmonic to the Cleveland Clinic at New Year's Eve to entertain the patients via video connection. We've gone on to look at ways to improve the dignity of patients. No longer do you have to clutch the back of your gown as you walk through the halls, but rather it looks more like a bathrobe. We've had greeters who meet patients at the hall and help them through their very difficult journey and navigating a very large institution. We've had massage therapies, and nothing is better than a lick from a lab that brings the pets to visit patients in the hospital, and you'll see them wandering through our lobbies greeting patients. Michael Porter, the Harvard business professor, wrote that innovation is the only true long-term solution to high-quality, affordable health care. Two of the things that all of us are trying to get now with reform. Let me show you a couple things that brought us, we used innovation to begin to decrease the complications and improve the quality. These blank spaces in the middle of these slides represent cholesterol crystals that were found at autopsy in patients after heart surgery. We often wondered why patients had strokes during heart surgery. We subsequently noted in these same patients that the incidence of atherosclerosis in their ascending aortas was increased as they aged. Our concern was that the blood returning from the heart-lung machine was acting much like a hose that you would use to clean a patio and knocking off these atherosclerotic plaques. So we took the technology from the bow of a yacht or a boat that deflects the waves around the ship and makes it more efficient, and turned it inside in a cannula, closed the tip of the cannula, put a deflector in it, and instead of jetting the blood into the ascending aorta, we sprayed it. This reduced the incidence of stroke in patients undergoing heart surgery by 30%. We then turned our attention to a problem of stroke in patients. It's well known now that 25% of the strokes in patients comes from clot in the heart from this little appendage that looks much like the tip of a thumb stuck on the left atrium. When blood is stagnant, clots form in this. And in a very sophisticated surgical thinking, we thought the best way to take care of this problem was get rid of the left atrial appendage. We tried a number of ways to do this, sewing it off, tying it off, stapling it off, and none of these worked. We then developed, with the inspiration from my daughters, of every kind of hair clip you could possibly think of, this clip that goes on the left atrial appendage. This is just completed this last week, clinical trials. And now we think that this will become a regular part of heart surgery to get rid of the left atrial appendage in anybody where you can see it, avoiding the potential for strokes going forward. We've begun to look at sustainability for our organization and established an Office of Healthy Environment. We've gone for LEEDs certification in all of our buildings. The first one of these is parking garage. We work with the EPA to develop a facility, seems to have a mind of its own now, a facility at Twinsburg that is compatible with the geography there. We've begun recycling. We've even started a program in the operating rooms to recycle medical plastics. The recycling goes on with the cardboard in our facility. We've moved our equipment recycling to send it to countries all over the world when we no longer can use it. We have a rotoclave, this an amazing machine, chops up medical waste and sterilizes it so it can be taken to dumps without representing a risk to society. And in fact, we've begun to recycle over 25% of our waste now, and it continues to grow on an almost monthly basis. We've been concerned about our energy usage, and you can see that we have reduced that significantly over the last 2 years. We've turned out lights, we've turned off computers, we have got low emission vehicles, bicycles. We have, today was the first of the farmers markets of the year. Unfortunately, it was a little rainy. We've begun to have community kitchen gardens around our facilities where community members can come in and grow vegetables and then take them and use them for their own. And we've begun to think about what healthcare really means. Most of my life I've been involved in sickness care. But if you look at the thought causes of premature death in the United States, they come from 3 reasons. 40% of them come from 3 reasons: obesity, sedentary life, and smoking. So the institution was the first in this country to begin to have a chief wellness office. Michael Roizen led that. We stopped smoking on all of our campuses, and we led a major campaign in Cuyahoga County to reduce smoking, and it went from one of the highest in the country to below the national average. And finally, we stopped hiring smokers. In a statement of what that meant to the community and trying to be a leader and walk the talk. As far as food is concerned, we took trans fats out of all of our foods. We began to list the calories on various amounts of food in our cafeteria. We offered free curves, a fitness center, and yoga to all of our employees, and most recently, we offered free Weight Watchers 5 months ago. Since that time, 5,000 of our employees have signed up and lost 34,000 pounds, or 64,000 pounds. The wellness program now includes the healthy environment, the chief wellness officer, nutrition, smoking cessation, a fitness center, Weight Watchers, and Curves memberships. The return on our $1 investment brings back $4 in increased productivity and decreased healthcare costs. So we are trying to establish, through new thinking, an organization that will be sustainable through the design that we have used to try and change the thinking in healthcare. Thank you for the opportunity.
So you can see a new kind of thinking at work on probably the most challenging aspect we have as a domestic society right now, which is how to finance a healthcare system which increasingly is going to have to service more and more baby boomers like myself, and at the same time do it with a degree of complexity as we change from the system we've had in the past to one that more resembles those of other industrialized nations. It's encouraging to me that someone with that mentality, that type of out-of-the-box thinking, would be such a prominent voice in the healthcare conversation this country's about to have, and I think we're all fortunate that the Cleveland Clinic and Toby's here to do that. The next panelist is Craig Wynett, who's the General Manager of Future Growth Initiatives. Love that title. In the brief time I've gotten to know Craig. I find it's just delightful. Often when people think of business executives, they don't think necessarily of people who are as broad a thinker as Craig is, or as well-read, or as thoughtful in the way he tries to assemble information. He calls himself seriously creative. I think that's probably a good description. He quoted something to me earlier which I really liked. He said that often there's a dichotomy in our society between the people with ideas and the people with money. And it's perceived that the people with ideas and the people with money really are two separate people. And he went on to say, quote, "When people with the ideas also have the money, serious things can happen." Craig is the senior executive responsible for developing the creative, in quotes, capabilities necessary to create, qualify, and launch game-changing products and services for P&G, where he has served for more than 20 years. He joined P&G in 1988 in the U.S. healthcare sector and advanced through increasing levels of responsibility to become the director of healthcare new products. In 1994, CEO John Pepper appointed Craig as the founding director of the newly established Corporate New Ventures organization. In 1998, he rose to general manager, and under his leadership, CNV produced many of P&G's most successful new products. In his best-selling book, which I actually have, which is kind of great, some of you may know about it, it was a great book called You. It was about your own personal looking at yourself as a body of how you would perceive what you wanted to do if you had the handbook, the owner's manual, as it were, for your own well-being and health. It went to #1 in the New York Times bestseller, and I think in major distinction to Craig's ability, he was #2 only to Harry Potter in 2005, which I think is phenomenal. His BS is in biochemistry from the University of Georgia. He has an MBA from the very respected University of Virginia. He works with A.G. Lafley, who's the CEO currently at P&G. And we thought particularly that P&G was an interesting representative to have here on the business panel because they've taken a whole systems approach to sustainability by looking at product design and innovation across the life cycle of its products in order to minimize the company's environmental footprint, from sourcing of raw materials to packaging to consumer use and habits. Overall, they believe that products should not require a trade-off between sustainability considerations and consumer needs for performance and value, which is why they incorporate sustainability considerations into the design of all products, packaging, and operations. Not the kind of thinking you might have thought you would have found at P&G, but here's the man who stands behind it, Craig.
Well, I got to tell you, hearing all that, I was struggling with about a post-traumatic stress syndrome. That's a rambling past I have. Let me say, I'm humbled to come after you, Toby. You know, relative to preventing strokes and heart attacks, there's just something about preventing ring around the collar that just doesn't ring quite as exciting. But be that as it may, I want to share some of what we've done and thought of and are thinking about when it comes to applying so-called design thinking to business and to innovation. And I'm going to pay particular attention to the thinking part of design thinking, because in my opinion, A, that's the most important part, and B, it's the part that we hear the least about. And so whenever I give these talks at P&G, which I do fairly frequently, I always start with what I think represents sort of just an ordinary example of these aha moments that all of us are sort of perpetually in search of. And so the one I show you today is this, remember when at the end of the first Iraq War, we were forecasting those terrible oil well fires were gonna, they'd still be burning today, a decade or more later. And yet old Red Adair, who came in with limited equipment, this is the hero oil rig firefighter from Texas, came in with limiting equipment and said, where are all my really big hoses? Big fire, you need a big hose, and they didn't have any. And he found a way then to take a bunch of small hoses, sort of surround the fire with several small hoses, and managed to achieve the same result as he did with what he was used to, some big one. And that's not all that profound, that's part of the point, but the results were quite profound, and I think he had these things out in 6 months versus the decade and a half or so that was originally forecast. So that'd be an aha moment that I'd be happy to have. So let's start with that as, I think, somewhat indicative of what we're all after. and then use that as sort of the branching off point. So relative to what you're going to hear me say as the relatively ordinary nature of extraordinary thought, what's part and parcel to this whole idea behind this conference and behind the so-called design thinking movement is this idea that what the hard-headed people in business are missing, the hard-headed, I should say, analytical people who run big companies are missing, is sort of that aesthetic sense, sense of design that seems so prevalent in architects and designers and artists. And what I'm going to talk about is the important assumption that very statement and the very existence of this movement implies about creativity itself. And what it says is that whatever creativity is, it's different, or as my mother used to tell me, special. So this is the starting point. So you don't believe me? Let me run a couple of things by. So how about this? You leave the conference, you're flying back home, and here comes the announcement. Welcome to our cruising altitude. We got a Captain Eureka at the controls today. He's the most creative pilot in the fleet. Where's my parachute? You'll be pleased to know that we've got Dr. Eureka, the most creative surgeon on staff, doing your child's operation today. What operation? Come on, let's face it. There is something that is implicit when we even attempt to take the essence of artistry and aesthetics and the sublime and these aha moments and think about applying to business, because the implicit assumption is that they're lacking there, that they don't naturally grow there, and that to some degree the people who are doing the business are inconsistent with the sort of people who are required to do the creative thinking. Right? So this is sort of the business view, and here's the Eureka moment view. This is the muse, of course, and one sort of splendor in the grass. This is that divine thought that seems to come literally out of nowhere. No roots, just here 1 second and not here before. I'm not going to name names, but this is from a recognized design firm from their website. And again, it's not that I'm taking issue with this. Now, the thesis I'm going to develop is that this kind of thinking, this idea that these miraculous innovations seem to literally, as the name implies, come out of nowhere, in my mind trivializes what's underneath any great design and any great innovation. And there's nothing random or ad hoc about it. So rather than these things that pop into your head, and I'm not saying, by the way, that most innovators do seem to say, the idea just sort of came to me, that I wasn't sort of looking for it necessarily. I didn't know it was en route, but, you know, it just sort of came to me. And it seems typically while you're in the shower for some plumbing-related reason. This is the scorecard of a successful brainstorming session. And if we didn't think creativity was a relatively random and unpredictable process, why in the hell do we have 100 square feet of wall covered in these things? If the answer's out there, you certainly don't spend time guessing at it. It wouldn't make much sense. But again, this idea of brainstorming, which is ostensibly an exercise in trial and error, again, makes the implicit assumption that whatever it is we're looking for, we can't in a premeditated way march our way to it. And if we could, clearly this doesn't make much sense. Let me tell you why I'm saying this. Again, I'm one of the strongest proponents of the design thinking movement you'll find. But as long as we're going to go to the trouble to have a movement, I think it's important to make sure we understand what is the essence of that movement. And while our CEO and other Fortune 100 CEOs are quick to say that innovation is the lifeblood of the company, what normally gets left out of discussion is that if that's true, creativity is in every way the heart. The heart, the core of innovation has to be creativity. That is the life-pumping mechanism. So the problem with this, again, call it the something out of nothing model of creativity that, again, is not explicit in what we see. It's more implied, which makes it, by the way, more dangerous, are three important points. One, that if we let creativity become ostensibly an exercise in alchemy, a few things happen. One, what I've seen as the effect of this is that when you start to contrast sort of the Bill Murray version of the Army versus the cadets out of West Point, what you do is you paradoxically end up running the risk of isolating design thinking from the mainstream, not mainstreaming it. So all the attention has an interesting effect of not only not making this the core of what we do, but potentially putting it well off on the side of what normal people do. The second reason I'm telling you this is because if creativity is literally close to this idea of divine inspiration, then it's not great news for the managers of the world, because you got to ask yourself, what's their role? And the role has typically been round up all the usual creative suspects, and then whatever you do, get out of their way. They can't be managed. The only thing I can do is to screw it up. And so what you find is a bit of a laissez-faire approach of any serious manager when it comes to what they personally can do to improve the creativity output. The last thing, and the last reason I'm interested in talking about this, is that whatever design thinking is, to be the basis for a sustainable movement, to have a profound impact on what we do, it better have some transparency about its mechanism. You know, and this is going back to Deming. Look, companies like ours are still able to grow profit at around twice the rate of sales. Why? Largely through the benefit of things like total quality and its predecessors. It was total quality ad hoc? Was it we achieved that incredible level of year after year productivity by winging it? No, there was nothing sort of random or ad hoc about it. Total quality became a borderline religion. And what Deming said is, look, for total quality to work, it's not enough that senior managers support it. They have to understand it, and if it's not led by a theory, even if it works, how are we going to know what happened? How are we going to know what to repeat? So I'm making the same argument for design thinking. All right, so here's where I'm coming from, that what I need to prove to you, and I'm going to give it my best shot, is that rather than these eureka, non-linear flashes of inspiration that either come from God, E.T., or I'm not sure where, that it's a really ordinary skill, like any other skill, you can be trained on, and you can get better at it. So what I'm going to do in a second may be the first ever attempt at mass radical creativity. So what I'm about to do is to give you a problem as a group that I think fits all the criteria of the sort of thing you'd want to be doing if, when you finish with it, somebody would say, boy, that's radical creativity. And here they are. You just scan it. This looks kind of reasonable, at least to me. Whatever happens here, it's unexpected. That seems like a common theme. It's nonlinear, which means I went from not having a clue to having the whole thing figured out in a way that I didn't see coming. They seem to always have the habit of being pretty obvious in retrospect. And again, the theme is it normally takes one of these sort of creative types to get the job done. So here we go. I'm going to give you the problem, and then let's see what happens. So I'm going to give you a problem that I think in a situation that meets all those criteria. Now let's see how you do. All right, ready? Here it is. In silence. Does anybody do the sound? Okay, who laughed? Congratulations, that's breakthrough thinking. I'm not kidding. Let's go through it. So, what happened there? Was whatever happened there went from totally unexpected to making perfect sense? Was it sort of nonlinear? You didn't see it coming, and then all of a sudden you sort of understood what it was? Could it be solved by simply saying, well, this must be some new kind of stretching this guy's doing? No, it's not sort of stretching plus. It's not some radical stretching. You needed something new to explain how this worked. Now, here's the one thing that seems different, unless we just happen to have selected this unbelievable group of 100% radical innovation types, is that apparently, if I'm right, in that what you just did was radical creativity defined along these dimensions, then we can skip the last one here, because it doesn't seem to be a requirement. Let's go a little further. Here's where I'm saying. What I'm saying, ha-ha is aha. And I didn't come up with this. Arthur Kessler came up with this originally around 1945. In fact, it was my son who originally cued me into this. And here's what he meant. So if I go and look at, even today, at the literature of saying, what is the cognitive neuroscience of the aha moment, the literature is virtually non-existent. What I think I've said is that humor behaves a good bit like aha. And if it does, then I can now stand on the shoulders of all the people, and there's a huge literature on the psychology of humor processing. And if they're similar to each other, then I can sort of apply that for this. So here's what happens. Forget the words necessarily, but here, categorization, it means that if I say, what's this, you say it's a clicker. Why? Because you've sort of created a mental category. This is called clicker. You've never seen this clicker, but it looks close enough to the other clickers for you to call it a clicker. It's pretty clear this is not an apple or a pear, it's a clicker. What you've done is categorize it. All right, there's all of you need to know about cognitive psychology. So how does this work? It works because we tend to categorize the world at a very superficial level. Why? From an evolutionary standpoint, you're hanging out on the African savanna 100,000 years ago, and here comes a charging lion. It really doesn't pay a lot of good to sort of think it over. If it looks like a lion, smells like a lion, running like a lion, get the hell out of there. And by the way, if you had a relative that was still thinking it over, he probably is not your relative anymore. So one, humor relies on. Humor relies on. The reason that you laughed is because we sort of caught you in the trap of looking at the world as we normally do in really superficial terms. What happened then? It doesn't work anymore. So I thought this guy was getting out, ready to take another stretch. Well, he not only didn't stretch, that to some degree, the exact opposite happened. Not only did he not stretch, he pushed the damn car over the hill. And here's the important third part, because if just the first two happen, that's just called surprise or a bad afternoon. In order for you to laugh, and here's the thinking part, in order for you to laugh, you have to have figured out how this thing makes sense. The term that Kessler used 50 years ago, he called recreative effort. And what he was basically saying is that in order to laugh at this joke, you have to recreate the logic that the person who invented it used. You have to recreate it, which means you have to rethink it, to relive it. And so, in essence, what you're doing is you're saying, you know, up until this point in time, I thought stretching was sort of limited to my usual definition. And pushing was somewhere in another place in my mind. But what this example showed me is that these things are surprisingly similar to each other. They look pretty different, but underneath, the act of pushing and the act of stretching can sort of achieve the same sort of objectives. And if instead of a fixed wall, you happen to be stretching hard against a car on the edge of a cliff, the wall doesn't move, but the car will, but it's the same thing. So, what is the AHA formula, which also happens to be the ha-ha formula? Things that look obviously different from each other, but turn out to be surprisingly similar to each other. I'm going to skip this example, but what I'm going to tell you is that if I approach this from the other side, and this is the great example of James Dyson, and I should add Sir James Dyson, the billionaire, Sir James Dyson, the CEO of the world's leading purveyor of vacuum cleaners, he did the same thing. So what did Dyson do? Most people are thinking, here's the vacuum and here's the filter bag. It's a given. That's the way vacuums separate the dust from the air. Dyson says, and we've talked to him extensively, he says here he is minding his own business at a sawmill, and the sawmill reminds him of a vacuum cleaner bag. How is that possible? It's because not that they're anything close to being similar literally, but the role, in particular the cyclone separator that you see, the thing on the right, hanging off of every lumber yard and sawmill you've ever seen, which separates the sawdust from the air, not with a physical filter like that bag, but with centripetal force. He said, you know, these are very different, but they're also surprisingly similar. They're surprisingly similar. What this formula amounts to is analogy. And from our experience, literally over the last couple of years, talking to the world's leading cognitive psychologists, I think I'm going to say that analogy appears not just to be center stage, that in terms of being at or near the core of cognition, it looks like the only actor. That if we can't find ways of using our past experience to explain seemingly unprecedented situations, if you didn't have relatives who can do that, you're not in the room. We have to be able to find these non-obvious connections between what appeared to be unprecedented problems, unprecedented situations, and our precedents. So, home stretch. What I think we're starting to develop here is that thinking, while the results may be extraordinary, the thinking is pretty damn ordinary. Breakthrough thinking is something that you proved that we can all do, and we can do it on demand to some degree. Now, I will say that if you're dicing into your analyst and he says, look, we're going to do some of that word association stuff, I say sawmill and tell me what comes to mind, and he says vacuum. I think he says we need to meet 5 days a week. So, it seems a little crazy, but underneath, it's not so crazy at all. In fact, there's nothing random about it. Last 2 slides. So, I've been giving you the spiel on breakthrough thinking, on the nature of the aha moment. Now we need an aha moment. I just want you to take a look at this, read this for a second, and then think about this. Everybody had a chance to read it? Okay, so this isn't a bad problem, and at the time it was a real problem. And it's not a problem that's in page 500 of the graduate gamma ray book. This is one of those problems. But look at where the solution comes from. You're going to kill yourself. Remember the red Adair thing? It's the exact same problem. But every time I've done this, nobody ever sees it. Why? Because we're so caught up in looking at the world at face value. The reality is that these are the same exact problem, or roughly the same problem, which means the solution for one will work really well for the solution to another one, right? I can surround this tumor with a lot of small rays and have the cumulative effect be kill the tumor while sparing the healthy tissue. Why doesn't anybody get it? Because, look, there's a lot of real estate between oil rig fires and oncology suites at the surface, but underneath, they're very much the same thing. So here's the last slide. I was out, we have a new puppy, a little English setter, and this unfortunately is not a manufactured example. And we happened to have over for dinner that night essentially the Cincinnati equivalent of the dog whisperer. And so he saw me doing what I think anybody in this room would do if you saw your dog chewing on your slipper, is you try to yank it away from him, wouldn't you? I mean, it seems sort of the right thing to do. But he said, what are you doing? I said, well, I'm doing, getting my slipper away from the dog. And he said, wrong. Here's what you do. Instead of pulling on it, which is encouraging them to pull more, push on it. They'll gag and let go immediately. So here's the point. The point is, before we start yanking on things, stop and ask, maybe pulling on it might be more in order. Thank you very much.
Thank you. And it gives Craig the esteemed position of being the person who's best explained Thomas Edison's famous dictum, creative genius is 99% perspiration and only 1% inspiration. Having concluded with the panel, we have a hard stop coming, so we apologize in advance, but we're not going to be able to take questions. We are going to have one question only, and that's for the purpose of tying something you heard this morning together with something you heard this afternoon. So the question is to Ray. Ray, what's the difference or the similarity? Difference or the similarity between Mission Zero and Bill McDonough's Cradle to Cradle?
Let's see, I think I've got the example here. what's happened? Whoop, whoop. The carpet tile backing is in many ways just as important as the face. This is the bottom side. It keeps it on the floor flat in place. This is a competitive material that actually has the cradle-to-cradle certification. It's called EVA, the ethylene vinyl acetate is a material. You see 8 dimensions of sustainability. The numerical value for this particular material is plotted at 100 along all 8 axes there. And this is cradle-to-cradle certification. The interface recycled PVC is that footprint on the inside there. So it's a far more, what we're doing is far more rigorous, going for 0.
Going for 0.
Yeah.
Going for 0. Which is the time we have left. I want to thank you all for being here today, and thank you very much, gentlemen of the panel.